Tammy Daybell married a gravedigger named Chad. That gravedigger started writing books about religion and his own visions and prophecies. He started to get a following. One of his followers was a woman named Lori, who was married to her fourth husband, Charles. In 2019, in a span of less than 5 months, Lori's husband, Charles, was shot and killed by her brother, Alex. Lori's children, JJ and Tylee, disappeared. Tammy Daybell died inside of her home. Lori and Chad went to Hawaii and got married. Tammy's body was exhumed, and Alex had a health episode on the toilet and died. Then JJ and Tylee's remains were uncovered in Chad's backyard. Chad and Lori were both charged with the murders of her children and his wife. Lori went to trial first and was convicted by an Idaho jury. Now Chad is preparing for his 2024 trial and was back in court today as the judge was making several important decisions regarding that trial. Tonight, we will show you what happened and break down what the trial of Chad Daybell will look like and how different it will be than Lori's trial earlier this year. All this as we continue our investigation of the Doomsday couple, Lori and Chad Daybell.
I'm Vinny Politan. Thank you for joining us here on Closing Arguments. It was a big day out in Idaho. I mean, a really big day when it comes to the upcoming trial of the so-called Doomsday Prophet, Chad Daybell. But let me begin here tonight. I love cameras. I love cameras. I mean, that's part of the reason why I do what I do. I get to hang out with a camera every night, right? There's one right there. There's another one over there. There's another one over there. But even before we all had these and everyone in the world walked around with a camera, I mean, growing up, I always had a camera in my hand. So, I mean, that's part of my DNA. I love cameras. But the place where I really love cameras are inside the courtroom, where we let the sun shine in and let the public see what is taking place in our system of justice. I think it's so important. Obviously, self-interest. I work at Court TV. I get it. But even before I worked at Court TV, I was watching trials on TV. So before I was like an employee, I was a fan. And I understood how important it was. And as a young lawyer, I would watch as many trials as possible. And to see, all right, how are they doing this? How am I supposed to do this whole thing? If I couldn't be in a courtroom during the day, at night I could watch what was happening inside those courtrooms. And I think what it really does for our system is gives a level of transparency. And with transparency comes trust. And it should be just standard that you should be able to see what's happening in your government. Especially folks like who may be busy during the day or have other responsibilities and have to do things and you can't get your way down to the courthouse either in your town or a town over or a state over from where you are. We should be able to see what's happening inside. I think every courtroom should have cameras. They should be streaming what's happening. But it's not quite there yet, but Court TV, we're doing our part. And let's talk about the Doomsday couple. Let's talk about this story and why cameras inside those courtrooms, I believe, are important. The community was invested when 2 children went missing, JJ and Tylee. Totally invested. Obviously, the families are invested. Families aren't all where the trial is happening. And the community as well. They all have a stake. And by the way, in every criminal case, it's not the prosecution versus the defendant, it's the people versus whoever the defendant is. The allegation is that someone has committed a crime against the public. So why shouldn't the public get to see the trial to find out what happened? To ensure that our system is working. And if it's not working, let's see it so we can fix it in whatever way we need to fix it. Trust, transparency, and the truth. Our courtrooms, our trials are supposed to be a search for the truth. But how do we know whether or not they got the truth if we can't see it? So, in the trial of Chad Daybell, ladies and gentlemen, I can announce tonight that we will see the evidence. We will see the evidence because today, Judge Boyce ruled that he's going to let the sunshine in. Take a look.
Requests here, the court is determined or has made a determination that in order to provide adequate access, the court is going to permit that the trial be broadcast while it occurs with certain restrictions.
There you go, folks. You will see the trial of Chad Daybell. You will see it. We heard Lori Daybell's trial. We covered it in depth here on Closing Arguments, but you will see the trial of Chad Daybell. It's going to be a much different trial. Much different trial. You're going to see a much different defense. And for the first time, you'll be able to see the evidence. So what I want to do this hour is kind of take a look at what's going to happen here. And I want to begin by talking about some of those big witnesses and those big moments and important moments in the case that will help this jury figure out the truth of what happened and figure out the truth of Chad Daybell's participation or lack of participation in the murders. And helping me tonight, we've got a great panel joining us from Salt Lake City, Utah. Private investigator Jason Jensen. In Boise, Idaho, trial lawyer, former Idaho Attorney General Dave Leroy is with us. Los Angeles, forensic psychiatrist, body language expert Dr. Carol Lieberman. And also in Salt Lake City, Utah tonight, private investigator, religious cult expert, and the author of Deceived, Mike King. Great to see everyone tonight. Thank you for joining us. I want to go through some of the big witnesses, the big moments, what we can expect, and how it all relates to Chad Daybell and in trying to prove the case against him or him being able to defend himself against these accusations. Let's begin with, there's two Melanies in the case. We'll begin with Melanie Gibb. This was a friend of Lori's, I believe a friend / perhaps follower at one point of Chad Daybell. An important member of this group that had all these beliefs. This is what she looks like. You will see her on the witness stand. Let's take a listen to a piece of her testimony from Lori Daybell's trial.
Did Lori ever indicate to you whether or not she and Chad were engaged in an affair?
She would just share that they were intimate.
Was this while Charles was still alive?
Yes.
Was this while Tammy was still alive?
Yes.
Did Lori indicate whether or not she thought it was okay that they were engaging in intimate relations?
She did. She felt it was according to God's will.
And did she tell you, ever expand on why she believed it was according to God's will?
Yes. She explained that because they had been married in multiple lives and they had a mission together, that it was okay.
And when we talk about her having a mission, did she ever talk to you about her mission to lead the $144,000 in relation to her children?
She indicated that she was a part of that group, the $144,000, and at some point everybody in her family would pass on just because of tribulations. At some point she shared that with me, probably in the very beginning.
All right, Jason Jensen, I'll begin with you. Melanie Gibb, she's kind of in the middle of everything here. So if you're trying to prosecute Chad Daybell, which is what the purpose is going to be here in this case, is to get him on the hook here for these three murders as well. How important do you think Melanie Gibb will be in that respect?
Well, it's important that Melanie Gibb's testimony is used to show that there was more than just a relationship between Chad and Lori in the context of a murder, but to show that he was the primary influence for her beliefs that led to the children's death, regardless who actually was responsible for the deaths themselves. But this is all a cult influence led by Chad Daybell.
Dave, your thoughts about Melanie Gibb here, because she is one of the witnesses in this case who has spoken to Chad and Lori, spent time at Lori's house. She was there. She knew about this adulterous relationship that predated the deaths of their spouses. How significant will she be? And are there issues for her on cross-examination?
She's going to be very important in this case, partially because she links in the 144 and the overarching philosophy that led to the children's death, arguably. And secondly, she is going to testify, as she just did for us, about the premarital relationship, the adulterous relationship. Remember here, there are new charges against Chad that we have not seen any proof on yet, and that's namely the death, first-degree murder of Tammy. And Chad alone is charged with that, and he's charged with some very weak language, aiding and abetting, advising, consulting, and that kind of thing is going to require being tied in, I think, by somebody like Melanie, that shows he had personal interest, love interest in this from the very start.
Dr. Carol Lieberman, to me, Melanie Gibb has been the one person who has been, and she's spoken on television as well, she's done interviews, but a significant witness in Lori's trial as well. What do you think about her level of credibility and her ability to withstand whatever John Pryor's going to do to her on cross-examination?
I think that she's rather questionable. I think that her motives, her feelings about their relationship and so on have not really been explored enough. You know, I think that she felt competition with Lori and was not happy that Lori got Chad instead of her. So I think really part of her will be more favorable to Chad. Although, of course, you know, she's not happy with him either because he picked Lori. But I mean, those are sort of the underpinnings, these undercurrents of what her feeling, besides what actually she experienced and what she thinks, those are the undercurrents.
All right, Mike King, I want to play for you some testimony from Zulema Pastines. And she, Alex Cox's wife, not for a long time, but at the time that he died and sort of in the middle of all of this, she seems to be another one of the followers. But she was married to Alex Cox, who I think all of us believe was like the hitman, who was the one who was actually murdering people in all of this. There she is in her police interview. Let's take a listen to some of her testimony from the trial.
Did Lori ever talk to you, or Lori and Chad ever talk to you about how long they expected JJ to live?
Lori had said that he was going to have a very short life. And then in a meeting that we had at Lori's house in early August
of 2019,
Chad said that JJ was going to have a very short life, that he was going to, the reason why he was going to live a short life was because he was going to come right back as Colby's child.
And to your knowledge, did Alex believe this?
Yes, but Alex believed everything they told him.
All right, Mike King, a lot of testimony about they. So it seems you may have to tie Lori and Chad together as a unit, but that's not the way it's going to play at trial. Obviously, he's going to try to get away from her. What are your thoughts about Chad Daybell being the so-called Doomsday Prophet, and some of the witnesses who will be called were some of his followers? How does that play?
I think it plays very well to teach the lesson that these coercive groups like this one, where they have coercive mind control, are masterful at getting people to buy off in the ideology. And it's the boiling a frog kind of a thing, Vinny. It doesn't happen overnight, but slowly, piece by piece, they get people like the group that we're seeing investing in the belief system. And once they start investing in that belief system, they then can't admit the fact that, hey, maybe I was duped, maybe I was wrong, maybe these are a bunch of crazy people. And it gives me this flashback memory of dealing with a ritual murderer who murdered a number of people. And with his brother, they came up with the same kinds of ideologies, and they started broadcasting or prophesying that they were going to commit these murders or that these people were going to die before they did it. And of course, there's always one who seems to be the one who is the voice of whatever this God is they believe in. And then the other comes along and they're the arm of the God's wishes, and they're the one that gets to fulfill it. And somehow, as a group, they get everyone to buy off on this ideology.
You know, as Dave pointed out, Jason, the big difference in this trial is going to be a lot more focus on Tammy Daybell and her murder. Let's take a listen to some of the testimony from Samantha Gwillim, who is Tammy's sister.
Did you learn that Chad had been remarried?
Yes, we learned it was actually 1 month to the day of her burial is when I found out about it.
Did you later learn when he had actually gotten married?
Yeah, because I told my husband to find out, because Chad was still speaking, you know, he was talking to my husband at that point, and I said, you find out when he actually got married, because I feel like that's very quick, even for somebody who's grieving. And like, you don't get married 4 weeks after you just buried your wife of almost 30 years. You just don't do that. And we found out it had only been 2 weeks after she had been buried, and we were devastated.
Jason Jensen, I see her as a witness that is kind of like the reality check of like, this is not normal. What is happening here, the time between the death and the marriage and this, there is something wrong going on here.
Yes, if this was just a basic murder, remarriage plot instead of all this mixed up with cult beliefs, that happens all the time where there's a death and all of a sudden remarriage, and you're thinking that this is related to an infidelity that led to this because they didn't want to lose their alimony or they didn't want to have to, fight for custody. They wanted just the wife out of the way so they can move on with their new relationship. So that part of it seems very traditional in some of these other kind of murder plots that are all convoluted with cult beliefs and the afterlife.
You know, one of the most fascinating witnesses from Lori's trial, who I believe will have to testify here in Chad's trial as well, was Audrey Baratiero, who was a member and probably the most loyal follower of Chad Daybell. Take a listen.
You thought Chad Daybell is telling me about my past. He can probably predict the future, too.
Yeah.
Because he was writing books about the end of the world. He was telling people who they were in prior lives, great people, not losers. And that gave you a feeling of, I'm somebody, right?
Yes.
All right, David Leroy, how will John Pryor cross-examine these followers, right? The followers of his client. You know, the Audreys of the world, the Zulemas of the world. Will he attack them, do you think?
Well, I think this whole trial will be about the Doomsday Prophet Chad trying to say that he's under the influence of the Doomsday Mom, Lori. And so John may concede that we have a prophet on our hands, but he's a lovesick man who somehow was drawn into Lori's sphere rather than remaining in charge of both prophecies and the actions of which he's charged. They're going to try Lori as much as John Pryor can in this case, and by cross-examination of some of these follows, he will introduce those themes if they're put on early.
All right, folks, our panel, they are staying with us for the hour. When we come back, we'll talk about the death penalty, another big issue today, plus coming up next hour.
In Jacksonville Beach, Florida, Jared Bridegan was shot and killed in an alleged murder-for-hire plot. Prosecutors say his ex-wife, Shanna Gardner, and her new husband ordered the hit during their bitter, ongoing custody battle. But will prosecutors be able to connect Shanna to the hitman?
From very, very early on, I felt, like, obviously I didn't have any evidence, but I felt that Mario Fernandez and Shanna Gardner would be involved.
Payne witnessed a hit and run.
Now a man is dead, and prosecutors are accusing her of taking the law into her own hands.
Either she or he fired the trigger in some kind of a struggle over the pistol.
The officers generally ask who fired a shot, and she makes statements to both of them admitting it was her.
Bizarre set of circumstances.
But will the jury see her actions as murder?
The car crash vigilante trial. Live coverage Tuesday, 8/7 Central on Court TV.
So on count 2, the charge you were convicted of, the first-degree murder of Tylee Ryan, you are sentenced to the custody of the State Board of Corrections to serve the maximum allowed sentence of fixed determinate term of life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. On count 4, the charge of the first-degree murder of Joshua Jackson Vallow, you are sentenced to the custody of the State Board of Corrections to serve the maximum allowed sentence, a fixed determinate life imprisonment sentence with no possibility of parole.
Lori Daybell started out as a death penalty trial. Death penalty was then wiped off the table because of something that the prosecutor did or didn't do, or was supposed to do, didn't get done, and the judge eliminated it. And now Chad Daybell facing the death penalty, but his attorney's making arguments against it today in front of the judge. First, though, let's take a listen to the prosecutor arguing why this should be a death penalty case.
The potential imposition of the death penalty is in no way linked to his waiver of speedy trial. I know the defendant tries to argue that it is because the co-defendant, by not waiving her speedy trial, ultimately ended up making an argument, and a successful argument, to get the death penalty removed from her side of the case. The defendant at that time didn't opt to ask to have his motion to sever reconsidered. He didn't opt to ask to reconsider the motion to continue the trial. He didn't at that time try to join in a motion arguing in any way he was being unfairly treated or penalized for waiving his right to a speedy trial. Instead, her case went through trial. He had the benefit of observing that trial and has now brought some motions based on his observations of that trial. And only now is trying to bring this as a reason to have the death penalty pulled from his case.
So now I want to play for you, and this is from a prior hearing, though, where John Pryor made one of his arguments against the death penalty for his client, Chad Daybell.
And I want to talk a little bit about gender stereotyping. And in gender stereotyping, I touched on the statistics that show a vast number of defendants, when there is a male and a female defendant, and you're dealing with cases of this magnitude, there's an overwhelming majority of the time that the male gets convicted and is sentenced to death, and the female is afforded a lesser sentence. I'm deeply concerned that in having both of those people here at the same time, that we're going to have some difficulties with that.
Okay, Dr. Carol Lieberman, let me ask you about if this case goes forward as a death penalty case, how does that change the dynamic for people, everyone involved, like from the defendant to the jurors?
Well, first of all, I think what he just said is true, that there is this bias, unconscious bias, thinking, that the man would be more deserving of death, or he was more responsible for the death than a woman, a frail little woman. How could she couldn't have been as much responsible as a man. Of course, this heightens things if it were to be a death penalty case. But I do think, regardless of the of the technical reasons, I do think that it's fair that they both face, that he doesn't face the death penalty. That, of course, something could come out during the trial that would show that he is more responsible. But on the whole, I don't think that I think if that was taken off the possibility for her to get the death penalty, it should be taken off for him too.
You know, Mike King, as we were looking at those photographs, which were evidence in court during Lori's trial of the couple getting married down in Hawaii, prosecutors wanted to put her to death. Now they want to put him to death. How do you see this issue playing inside a courtroom in Idaho?
Yeah, can't you? Every time I look at this picture that's on the screen right now, it just drives me batty, Vinny. I think there's a couple of things to consider in this case. Number one, Lori got away with getting out of the death penalty. But this case also involves the murder of Tammy, which is independent and still could be a death penalty case, I would suspect. And I guess that's something that I need to kind of learn and understand a little better. But this thing boils down to the fact that there was planning, there was preparation, it was premeditated. It's clear through the revelations that were coming out and him saying for weeks in advance that she too was going to die early. How come everybody around them is scheduled to die early except for the two of them? The fact that they're married 2 weeks after, I think, is all going to lead toward this. And I think it kind of sets them apart in a small way. But I think it is a little bit of a challenge because you can't give it to one and not the other in most of our thinking. And so this is going to be really interesting to see what they respond to. And I really loved hearing the AG talk a little bit about this case, because I keep going back to the fact that I think the prosecution needs to be really cautious when they introduce the ritualism and the ritual crime portion of this versus the elements of murder, because that's what this is about. And then the fact that they were religious zealots is aggravating factors that should go into the sentencing, in my opinion.
Dave Leroy, what do you think about, she doesn't get the death penalty. If he's convicted, at this point, prosecutors want him to get the death penalty. Is the fact that she didn't get it, is that something that should be considered, or is that irrelevant to the discussion of how this trial should proceed against Chad Daybell?
Well, during today's hearing, the judge pointed out that the state confirmed that the death penalty was levied against both of these individuals well before Lori's trial went forward, well before she elected to proceed immediately, etc. But in a death penalty case, every argument, every objection is a United States Supreme Court argument. And this idea of comparative culpability, while it doesn't have any specific legs in Idaho law, nor in this kind of situation precisely, as far as I'm aware, has it been presented any place around the country. It will no doubt wander its way through the Idaho courts, through the federal courts, and maybe be offered up to the United States Supreme Court on a comparative culpability issue. However, as has been discussed, there are some very distinct elements here. Number one, Chad was the one who decided not to proceed immediately, thereby relieving that discovery issue. He didn't make a record at the time, and he is charged with separate crimes. So all things being equal, I think comparative culpability will probably go away in this case if the judge rules that the death penalty remains on the desk, as I believe he will, and if the jury somehow, after two phases of a trial, would convict him of that.
Jason Jensen, as to Tammy Daybell, what are your thoughts about her death? Was it Alex Cox, the so-called hitman, or do you think Chad Daybell himself could be found as the person who actually took the life of Tammy?
Well, clearly, Alex Cox may have been the shooter. We know from the evidence that there was a couple attempts, at least one attempt beforehand, that the gun didn't go off right. It malfunctioned. So if he's the shooter, who's the benefactor of the murder? And we know that with all the prediction and the planning, it clearly all comes back to Chad himself being responsible for the murder of his 30-year-long married wife. So clearly everything's going to come back to him, and with him being the center of this cult lifestyle with all of these predictions of all these other murders, Alex Cox himself ends up dead, and that's a questionable death. We don't know if it was a murder or just the weirdest coincidence on the John. But if all this comes back to Chad, obviously he's in a more egregious situation where the death penalty could apply to him and be an exception for Lori's situation. We know during the pre-trial phase, she was having competency evaluations, she was having breakdowns, so she may have not been given the death penalty by the end of the run anyway.
All right, folks, when we come back, it's a question we've been debating and talking about since all of this began. In this relationship, Chad and Lori, as you can see right here from the evidence inside the courtroom, they look happy together, but was one the leader and one the follower? Because if you recall, when it happened, I was a little surprised by the words of the prosecutor, but at Lori's trial, the prosecutor said she was the mastermind in all of this. What will happen at Chad's trial? What will the prosecutor say there?
Because of her manipulation and deception, she would find somebody that could manipulate, like he was manipulating to see me too. He tricked her, she tricked him. They tricked each other so well that they were their equal opposite evil match for each other. Right. Like they got exactly what they put out. You know, what you put out comes back to you. I think that's what they did for each other.
I've worked hard all my life. I've gone from being a local reporter to becoming a law student to then even going on to teach other lawyers, all before I came to Court TV. As a journalist, lawyer, and teacher, I learned the secret to success is speaking in your authentic voice. And I bring that lesson to my show, Opening Statements, every morning on Court TV.
Opening Statements with Julie Grant. Weekday mornings at 8, 7 Central. Only on Court TV.
Mr. Woods specifically said this was Lori and she was the one in charge of the conspiracy. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. He was very clear. Now, the case law, particularly the federal case law, and Pierce alludes to the fact that a prosecutor cannot, in one instance, sit there and tell one set of jurors a year ago, or whatever, 8 months ago, say one thing to one set of jurors and stand up in front of them and say, Lori Vallow was the one running the whole show. Tell that set of jurors that, and then turn around in Chad Daybell's trial that's going to occur starting hopefully in Ada County in 4 months, and tell them, oh, well, I know I told the jurors in Lori Vallow's trial that Lori was in charge and she was the one driving force behind everything, and she was in charge. But you folks here at this new jury in Ada County in April and May, I'm going to tell you something different. I'm going to tell you now I've decided that now Chad is the one who was doing all of this. And it was all Chad leading the conspiracy. It was all Chad who was the leading force, and he was dictating everything. They're not allowed to do that, and the federal case law supports that.
Great point being made by John Pryor. And remember, I'm a former prosecutor. Our job is to seek the truth, and the truth is justice. Okay? Seek justice, which is the truth. That's the way it works. That's the way it works. So if you say something and make an argument, you need to believe that that is the truth. You don't make arguments that you don't believe are the truth just to get a conviction. Then you're no longer a prosecutor. Defense attorneys can do that. Their job is to represent their client. They have no connection or obligation to the truth. A prosecutor, that's your whole job. That's your mission. Ethically, morally, and I believe legally. Take a listen. This is what John Pryor was talking about. Rob Wood in his closing argument at Lori Daybell's trial.
Lori manipulated Alex Cox through religion. She manipulated Chad
through emotional and sexual control. They manipulated their friends through this use of religion. Lori Vallow is telling Alex Cox what to do. In these messages, you never see Alex tell her what to do. He's telling her what to do. She's telling him what to do. Lori uses sex to manipulate Chad. And Chad seeks confirmation from Lori repeatedly.
So that argument was clear. So, Dave, let me ask you, can prosecutors come into court and say that Chad was now the leader? He was the one in charge of this conspiracy?
Well, of course, the state denied that the thrust, the fair interpretation of their argument was as the defense asserted. However, there is apparently a 52-page transcript of those arguments. The judge actually pointed out today to the prosecution that he will expect some degree of consistency in argument about these facts. And John Pryor jumped right on that at the very end of the hearing on that motion and said, well, Your Honor, may I use the 52-page transcript of the argument in evidence in Chad's case? And the judge declined to rule on that. So we will expect some consistency, and we will expect some twisting a bit by the state to explain that what they meant to say was what they didn't quite say, or what they did say can be interpreted another way. But consistency will be required. This court has already generally suggested by its comment today.
Yeah, and I believe ethically a prosecutor should not be talking out of both sides of their mouth. They can't. I mean, defense attorneys are allowed to. I mean, it's a whole different obligation, I believe. Dr. Carol Lieberman, this relationship is everything, right? Chad and Lori. Do you believe that Lori was manipulating Chad, or do you believe Chad was manipulating Lori? Who is leading who through this sick conspiracy?
Well, as you may recall, I have said during Lori's trial that it was a folie à deux, that it was a shared psychosis. And the things that were the folly, the psychosis, the crazy part, was both the cult, the religious issues, and also the sexual drive for each other. And I think, one of my books is called Bad Girls, Why Men Love Them and How Good Girls Can Learn Their Secrets. And I talk about men who are vulnerable to bad girls as sitting ducks. And Chad fits very well into this category of sitting ducks. And Lori, a bad girl, saw that and got her hands on him. And I do think that she was primarily the more of a manipulator. I mean, he did want her admiration and so on, but I think she was the more active manipulator. And if they play that, which I'm sure of course they will, that video of them in Hawaii, the number of times that they play that is going to just seal the deal against him, just like it did for her. When people say that, yes, it is infuriating to think that while they were enjoying themselves and having sex and getting married and all of that, they didn't care where the kids, well, they knew where the kids were, but, and they got rid of all the people who they felt stood in their way of them going off into the sunset. And that is just repulsive.
Mike King, your thoughts about the relationship and who's in charge?
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Lieberman. It's the two of them, and one doesn't take away from the other. The prosecution has got to go back to the initial stages of this thing. Number one, Lori was out there convincing Alex to beat up Joe Ryan, and Alex kills Vallow. Those things are really clear. But what they're not talking enough about, in my opinion, is the fact that Lori wanted to meet this self-proclaimed prophet of God who was speaking at all these kinds of end of world seminars, and that there she then connects with him. And yes, he probably was just overwhelmed by the attention that he was getting, but she was there because they believed that he was a prophet and he was leading it. And then they become this powerhouse of gasoline and fuel and fire, and together these decisions were made. And they can separate it out and go back to Tammy, that somebody had to make the decisions on Tammy. You can buy off that Lori may have convinced Alex to continue to do things and kill the kids and be in charge, But when it comes to Tammy Daybell, they've got to be able to say that Chad Daybell, it was his wife, his home, he was in the room, he set his son up to fall for this thing and walk in and discover the mother. All of these things are going to be behaviorally really important in suggesting that this guy was in control. Was he in ultimate control? I don't know, but he was in control equally, in my opinion, and there was two oxen pulling that cart.
Jason Jensen, I think she was obsessed with his books, and I think he was obsessed with her looks.
That's a good point, Vinny. What I see is, that this was the making of a power couple. She wanted to live his dream of being the one at his side while they're making all these prophecies and going to the afterworld. And this was a team effort. So oftentimes, like in where you got a king and queen in charge of a kingdom, sometimes the queen makes the decision and the king enforces it. I think that this was a mutual beneficial relationship that everyone around them had to suffer.
Yeah, it's amazing though, when the end of times comes, I think we will look for a couple sitting by a pool in Hawaii to lead us. That's where I'm looking. I mean, we need someone in a bikini and someone with like googly eyes to lead. I mean, okay.